So, my dear brothers and sisters, we continue to wish everyone a very merry and blessed and happy Christmas as we continue these 8 days, the first 8 days of the Christmas season in our faith, which we call the octave of Christmas, which ends with giving honor to the Mother of God. At the beginning, we honor the Son's birth. At the end of the 8 days, we honor the Mother. In the middle, we honor the Holy Family who cared for one another through life. And then, of course, there's the 12 days of Christmas, which we're also just really beginning, which end with the Epiphany. In full, over these next 2 weeks, we'll continue to celebrate the Christmas season again, ending with the baptism of the Lord on January the 10th. Each year, we do mark this Sunday in between Christmas and New Year's Day with the Holy Family, and we hear one of three Gospels. Last year we heard the story of Mary and Joseph and Jesus fleeing to Egypt to get away from Herod, who was looking to destroy the newborn king because he was jealous of him and thought he would be taking his place. And of course that really wasn't the kind of king that Jesus is. And then today we hear the story of the presentation in the temple. This gospel passage is always read on February 2nd, which is kind of the unofficial end of the season of Christmas, when we bless the candles for Mass for throughout the year. And we remember that moment of 40 days after Jesus was born, when he went to be presented in the temple according to Jewish tradition. And he also was the Son of God, God himself entering his own temple for the first time in human flesh. And then thirdly, in another year, next year, we'll be reading the passage of Jesus finding in the temple when he was 12 years old, after Mary and Joseph had lost him for 3 days, and they found him. And so these three different gospel passages teach us about the joys and the sorrows of Mary and Joseph. We've heard of the 7 sorrows of Mary. Well, 3 of those are in those 3 gospels, right? That they had to flee to Egypt was one of them. Leave their homeland to get away to save their lives. And the second one was when Simeon said that a sword of sorrow would pierce Mary. And then another sorrow of Mary and Joseph was losing him for 3 days. And so the Holy Family did not live a perfect life in terms of the struggles that they faced in their life. Yes, in terms of virtue and love for one another and love for God, they always chose by God's grace to love perfectly. They never sinned. But just because we may be good and we may not sin does not mean that we all don't go through the trials and travails of life. And the Holy Family really teaches us how to live through those and how to remain in peace and joy and love for one another even amidst the joys and struggles of life. This feast day began to be celebrated in the church a little over 100 years ago, and the Pope at the time was looking at how society was changing and how much more difficult it was for family life as the modern world was growing into the industrial age. People were moving into cities, they were working long hours, and in fact children were even working long hours in factories. There had been no labor laws yet, and in many places obviously in the world there are not, unfortunately. And the Holy Father said, all of these modern things are pulling the family apart. You know, there's more distractions. You know, people used to live mostly in the countryside, like out here, and they lived to survive, right? To put food on the table and to have a roof over their heads. And of course, in the modern age, we don't struggle so much for those things in many places. There are many places in the world that still do, of course. But there are all the distractions and the interferences that the modern world puts into our family life in this day and age. It's the social media. It's the pressure of the political and societal upheaval that's around us. It's constantly being pumped into our homes on the news and in every other way to bring so much anxiety and distress to us all. And then, of course, there's the pressure of being apart from each other. We live much of our lives outside of our homes apart from each other, don't we, as we go off to work somewhere else other than the home or in the farm field together. And all of these things pull a family apart, so much so that obviously the evils of divorce and family strife of so many other kinds, and people being spread out all over the country and all over the world as we go to work in different places. All of these things have, in a sense, devastated family life, let's face it. And so the church is calling us back to that model of the holy family life. Of course, where did the falling apart of the family begin? Well, it was Adam and Eve, right? First of all, their relationship and their marriage fell apart, and then they passed on original sin to their children, Cain and Abel, and what happens? Well, there's one brother taking the life of the other, and so God promised to redeem the family, didn't he? And so first of all, he creates the new Eve by preserving Mary from original sin, and ever after that, she said yes and was obedient to the Father's plan. And then he preserved the man, St. Joseph, the most just man that ever lived, to be the foster father of that family. And then he made Jesus as the new Adam, who would be perfectly obedient to God the Father. And so this holy family preserved the union of love in everything. And not only that, but they sought out the Father's will in everything. They listened to the voice of God, and they followed wherever he led them. And it was through listening to the Father and obeying him that their lives were saved together, right? The angel appears to Joseph and says, I'm going to take you off to Egypt to protect you so that Herod does not take the life of my son. And Mary said yes to the angel, trusting that she didn't know how all this was going to work. How could she even be expecting without having a relationship with the man? And God said, I will make it work. And then, of course, the rest of their family life, how did they get through it? By following the Father's will. And you can imagine the kind of bond of love that forms when we're with God in the middle of our trials and travails, right? If we kind of hurt one another on the way through the trials and travails of life, it makes it worse. Maybe we've experienced that. And so without God, life becomes difficult, almost unbearable in family life and marriage. With God, things become bearable. And like the Holy Family, I think we're called to seek out the will of God daily, individually, because God wants to remake his life in each of us personally and individually. He calls us to seek out his will in prayer every day. Father, what is your will for me? But he's also seeking out our agreement to his will in our family life and in our marriage. As a family, are we discussing what God wants for the family? When the opportunity for a new job comes along, are we bringing it to God in prayer as a family? Is this what you want for us as a family, Lord? If we're out of work, what is it that you're saying to us now, Lord? Are you redirecting us in a new way that we're not seeing? Sometimes we don't see the hand of God in the sufferings that we bear in life. Even when somebody dies in the family, there's a shift in God's leading and guiding us in our family life to something new. And are we asking, Father, what is your will in the midst of all this? That's what the Holy Family did. No matter what the experience or the difficulty that they're going through in their life, they were always seeking the will of the Father. And it was in that peace and joy was found. And so even though the world around us may present so many difficulties in our day and age, God is calling us together again as family. And many of the prophecies that we've been talking about, the Catholic visionaries and prophets in recent days, have been saying that even though we're entering a time of greater trial, a time of purification, a time of passing into a new era, what's going to happen if we're open to God is he's going to make us rely more on one another than we have ever. In our families, in our church, in our community, we will become, if we're open to God in the middle of all the travails of the current world right now, we will become very, very reliant upon each other. Why? Because God is with us, and we are the ones who will take care of each other in charity as the Holy Family took care of each other through all those difficulties they faced. You know, I was reflecting the other day upon God's will in our family life. You know, I grew up in a family business. My grandpa and dad were woodworkers, a little bit like St. Joseph and Jesus, my dad likes to say. And so I was the oldest, you know, and I grew up in that family, and I worked in the family business for several years since I was small, really all through high school and college and 6 years after that. And it's common tradition, right, that the oldest son takes over the family business and keeps the tradition of the family livelihood going, so on and so forth. And I think it wasn't easy for me to leave that. You know, Jesus stayed home for 30 years, didn't he? He took care of the family business. He did what he did. And then the father called him to go out on mission, right, for 3 years and then give his life. Well, I often wonder, you know, I mean, obviously St. Joseph's life, he left the world before that happened, but Mary remained. And what it's like for parents, you know, especially for my dad, I think. Pray for my dad, because he gave a great sacrifice in giving me to the priesthood. You know, it's funny because every time I call home, what's the first thing he says? Well, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? Every time I call him on the phone, when are you coming home? And it wasn't easy for him, because I think he had great hopes that I, like he did, would follow in the footsteps of our fathers, our grandfathers. And so, but I heard the call from God, and I knew it was time. In fact, I delayed it for a long time because it didn't seem like the right time. But the fact of the matter is that if we're listening to the will of God, he's going to call us to make some pretty big sacrifices. That's what family life is about. In fact, Jesus showed us that, right? Didn't he? Imagine the Blessed Mother knew that had to come. She didn't like it, but she willed it because it was the way that we were going to be saved and we were going to become part of God's family, was that her son would give his life. And she also had the hope, though, that life was going to be restored. And even though God asks us to sacrifice in family life, to give ourselves up for one another, to give ourselves up for the church of God, for the bigger family of God, and the more we become open to that, the more we know that he's going to bless us and he's going to unite us more strongly in the bond of love than he ever did before. That's the result of people who give themselves totally for each other, is that the bond of love becomes very, very, very deep and strong, doesn't it? When we suffer with the loved one who's dying, we know that can be the most difficult thing we've experienced, and yet it's the most powerful thing in terms of love that we can experience, because we grow closer spiritually and emotionally in every way through that process of suffering. The Holy Family knew that secret. Jesus, of course, showed us that secret visibly when he gave his life for you and me. And so we should never be afraid to give everything. We should never be afraid and hold anything back if it's what God wants for us in our family life. And we should never be afraid that we're not going to receive something much better if we do persevere through those difficulties. Think about this. The family of God in heaven is going to be a place of perfect joy. And everyone who believed in Jesus and strove to live according to his grace is going to be together forever, all of us at once. That's something to think about. You know, when you're going through the toughness of your family life, think about what's going to be in the future. And when somebody is difficult to live with, and many times all of us are difficult to live with, let's face it, think about that family member as perfected in heaven, like they're going to be, not maybe as they are a little bit fallen right now, but as they will be. And how God will eliminate everything that was difficult and was sinful and wasn't good in ourselves and in our family members. And we're going to live a more wonderful family life together than we ever were able to in this earth. And that should pull us through and motivate us to continue to offer ourselves in charity to the people around us, even when it's difficult, and to love them even when it seems impossible, because we can see them as God sees them and as we will see them perfected in heaven in his truth and love and holiness. These are all difficult times that we live in, and yet they're amazing times because we get to prove our love, our faithfulness for each other in our marriages and in our families and in the church of God, to care for one another in a deeper way than we have before. You know, there's a wonderful prayer that is traditional in the faith, and we'll pray it 3 times here. And I encourage you to pray it often in your daily life, to maybe add it to your prayers. It's very simple. I'll say it 1 time, and then we'll pray it 3 times together. It goes like this, where you ask the Holy Family to help you, okay, and to help save everybody, right? It goes like this: Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, save souls. It's very simple. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, save souls. Let's offer that prayer together 3 times on this feast of the Holy Family. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, save souls. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, save souls. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, save souls. Please stand as we profess our faith.